Good afternoon, everybody. After my goblin shenanigans, I've moved up to something ever so slightly bigger. I'm going for a Through the Breach Izzet Tron deck, based on Top Bloke Jarvis Hughes' PTQ winning deck from ages ago. Now Jarvis tells me that deck was bad in hindsight, and I totally believe him, but I'm gonna give it a shot anyway because I think it's really sweet and it's actually can be better than it looks. And there's also a few unusual card choices in how I built it, I guess. So the first part to look at is the mana base that requires these Tron lands. Now obviously you can play this type of deck with no Tron lands at all, and you can be just straight up blue-red Through the Breach with more hand stuff, but I like the idea of having the alternate path of just casting some Eldrazi at some point. It does mean our mana base is a bit on the sketchy side though. We're leaning quite heavily on Izzet Signets. We need to play a bunch of Steam Vents because when we draw our lands, we really need them to be untapped. So we have a full 4 Steam Vents, 4 Scalding Tarns, and 4 basics. We also have these expedition maps, obviously, because they help assemble the Tron stuff, but can find us other lands in a pinch. We have a few cheap interactive spells in Spell Snare and Spell Pierce to help us force through the breach, or at least mess with the opponent's plan until we can get to do this thing. We have a Miser Lightning Bolt because when you've got Snapcaster in your deck, you might as well have at least one Lightning Bolt because when you draw it, it's great, and even when it's not great, it's still not usually terrible. We don't have much in the way of card drawing. Previous versions of Tron decks would play things like Compulsive Research, which I found to be a bit on the slow side and doesn't fit with the general instant speed game plan, since you'll notice that outside of Izzet Signet Expedition map, basically everything's an instant, from Electrolyze, Remand, Pierces. Through the Breach is an instant as well, so you can do it during their end step. So we're using these Electrolyzes and Remands to help smooth out our draws. We have a couple of Spicy Epiphany at the Drownyards, which can be fired off as a cheapish spell, and it's not awful, but sometimes with these types of decks you assemble Tron and you just don't have that much to do with it. So casting it for a large number is always quite good. We have some Izzet Charms to help us filter through our draws when we're flooded, and it's another interactive spell. And over here we have, well, Emrakul's, otherwise this Through the Breach plan doesn't work. But we also have one Kozilek. It's arguable that a different Eldrazi is better, but I wanted another thing with Annihilator to go with it Through the Breach. This one is relatively castable also, compared to some other ones. I mean, to be fair, the difference between 10 and 11 isn't that massive once Tron lands are involved. But I thought we're trying it out. That's all we're really doing. This I certainly wouldn't say is a finished product, but there's only one way to find out what's better than between a couple of options, and where in theory you might be looking, well, Ulamog could be better, or Kozilek could be better, or the new Ulamog could be better. I'm just starting with this Kozilek to see how it goes. The sideboard though, that's got a few nice ones. We have a couple of Pyroclasms, a couple of Lightning Bolts, so we can sort of transition into a slightly more effective defensive deck against decks with small red creatures. We have a Miser Grafdigger Cage. It is important to note though that we have deliberately limited the amount of artifacts that we put in our deck. It's very common for Tron decks to put a bunch of artifacts in the sideboard, but it's also simultaneously very common for enemy decks to put a bunch of artifact destruction spells in their sideboards and to bring them in. So I don't like playing directly into them. On the other hand, Grafdigger's Cage is multi-purpose enough that it is fine. You know, sometimes it'll get blown up, but I'm not going to be too upset if it prevents a Chord of Calling from working for a bunch of turns. We have some relics, which don't really get hit by the artifact destruction so much because you just draw a card. And I've noticed an uptick in graveyard decks recently. We have a Miser Shadow of Doubt, which is obviously the best possible way to mise against Scapeshift, especially if they've trying to besiege you out. It's hard to say. But it's also just useful against other decks also. And sometimes you just LD people when you go and search their library for a card with a fetch land, and suddenly they cannot do that. Negates are multi-purpose, can counter Nahiris most notably, whereas things like Dispel cannot. Mindbreak Trap is a sweet one because it doesn't get affected by Besieger. It also is very satisfying to get someone who is not expecting to be Mindbreak Trapped. And it's a shiny one, which gives you extra style points. Annex. I'm not gonna lie, Annex is a bit on the ambitious side, but against other Tron decks, I think we're unfavored against red-green for sure, since they can just cast the new Ulamog sometimes before we can do anything about it. And let me tell you, if you've ever annexed someone in a Tron Mirror match, it feels great. It can also function as an LD spell against Besieger again. I know I've mentioned Besieger several times, but it's a side benefit. And every so often, Annex will be good against other decks also. And we have this Keranos, which is the card that we bring in against Jund. We don't bring it in against the Nahiri decks, unfortunately, since being an enchantment, it gets owned pretty hard by Nahiri. But it lets you play a slightly different plan if they're using hand disruption, like any of the hand disruption decks. If you can land a Keranos, you're in fairly good shape, and it provides an alternate win condition if you sort of need to take out some of the pieces of the Through the Breach combo in order to defend yourself effectively. Again, I was told that it doesn't come in that often, in theory, but that's fine with me. I'm okay with testing it out, seeing if it's still sweet. So here we are. Izzet Tron getting ready to do some league matches. I'll see you soon.